Hello and welcome to Bad Movies Don't Exist, where films, television shows, and other media that get ignored, scoffed at, or figuratively spat upon are embraced, held, and loved for their unseen greatness. Wow, that intro is dramatic. My name is Sunnamerica, and I'm your host. And today we are not talking about a singular film, but we are talking about a guy. And that guy's name is Neil Breen. So if you are a fan of Neil, or if you would like to learn more about him, stay tuned because we are going to dive into it. Now today our guest is Molly Pass. She is an actor, a filmmaker, and owner of Moon Trip Productions. She is also a lover of film theory. So we're going to hear what she has to say about Neil Breen. All right, let's get into it. Well, hello, Molly. I'm introducing Molly Pass to you guys, the owner of Moon Trip Productions, a filmmaker and actor and friend of mine. How are you today?
I'm good. So official. I'm glad that you tagged in that friend of mine just to make me feel comfortable on the show. I really appreciate it. No, I am honestly so excited to be here because I know how much Neil Breen means to you. So I feel like to be invited on this particular episode of the pod, I think is especially it's an honor, I should say, to be here with you today.
Yay. Well, yeah, I definitely felt like you would be the perfect person to discuss this man. And a little note about the friend of mine thing. I did want to include that because I didn't want people to think you were just a random person I found on the internet, which would be fine too. That'd be fine, but you are not random.
Appreciate it. I feel like I am no more random than our man at the hour.
Yes.
I think honestly on the theme, even if I was someone you had pulled off the street, that would have actually been on brand for this episode as well. I feel like, or if because of my research, if you had done a Craigslist listing for people to come onto your podcast, that would be probably like the most on theme way to get a guest, I would say.
Yes. Craigslist listing for podcast guests. Well, with that in mind, let's get into Neil Breen. So, in your words, if you were to explain who he is to someone who is not acquainted, how would you describe him?
I feel like, and this is no shade to Neil or guys like Neil, I feel like I've met a lot of guys in this font, but just not all of them have actually carried through to actually doing the things that they said that they were going to do in the way that he has. But Neil Breen, I feel like is one of those people. He's a filmmaker. I would say that he's the kind of guy that would describe himself as a visionary. Whether or not you decide to see him as a visionary is up to you, and I think it's really fair. Either way you want to go on that. But I think that he is a person who loves film so much, but is very anti the system in a lot of ways. So I would describe him as an independent filmmaker who is, I guess entirely his whole kind of thing is that he does it all. And so I would say he is the indie filmmaker that wears all the hats. But in a way that is at the same time an auteur in a way. Like I think that he very much views himself, and I think that you could argue that he has a very particular style. But at the end of the day, he is one man doing several jobs in independent cinema. If you're out of the industry, and if you are in the industry, he is like a cult film director extraordinaire, I guess. Yeah. So maybe a layman definition and a little bit more of like a, if you've dated this guy, you know.
So you used a word, auteur, of the auteur theory, a very divisive theory in film criticism. Can you give a quick definition for our folks at home who may not be acquainted with that, and why Neil, I would argue too, why you would argue Neil is an auteur?
Yeah. I think it's also funny that our natural accents are so different that I'm always like auteur and auteur.
No, I wasn't correcting you on that at all.
No, you're so good. And like that's what I mean. Like I think it's so funny, like the way that people's like accents sit and like the way
Mm-hmm.
that we hear things and like because that I believe like many film terms I think is like a French origin word. But
Mm-hmm.
basically uh auteur theory is the idea that you as the director are the author of the film. You are in full control of the vibe basically of kind of the creativity and all of the components that make it a film you ultimately are responsible for. And the auteur theory is that there are some directors that do this with such a particular heavy hand, maybe, with kind of the tools that they use, because you can do this in a variety of ways. But they have crafted a type, essentially, of film and stylistic kind of tool set that when you see that film, you're like, oh, that is a this person film. So, like, oh, I'm watching a Hitchcock movie. This is a
Mm-hmm.
Wes Anderson movie. Like, Tarantino, I would argue, is an auteur as well. Like, you watch these movies, you look at them, and you're like, oh, based on all the things that I'm seeing, this is a this person movie. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that Neil Breen has such an interesting style because I try, as a filmmaker, I'm not quite sure how much is intentional and how
Mm-hmm.
much is like not necessarily intentional.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that his style is very unique to him and to his films. And if you've
Mm-hmm.
seen, honestly, even one of them, I think you would kind of get what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a great explanation. He is definitely has his artistic signature throughout his entire film catalog. Now, he's made six feature films and one documentary question mark
Is that the
masterclass
like
question mark.
return to
That's
them? Is that
that
where he goes back to all the films?
it's the
Or
retrospective where he
yes, the
basically
retrospective.
explains, yeah, he explains his process, which he said in one of the interviews or one of the Q&As I read, a Q&A I read, that it's taught in film schools now, so that's cool. From
Whoa.
his what he said. Um
You're like, let me clarify that I'm not sure on the podcast if this is true. Before
yes.
we spread some misinformation on this Neil Breen podcast. Which again I think might be a perfect place. I'm super excited to talk about themes later, but we'll get there when
A
we get
perfect place
there.
to spread misinformation.
Yeah, like what's happening?
And I'm looking at his filmography right now on my phone, and he appears to have used the same picture of himself on the poster for Double Down and I Am Here dot 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 now.
Yeah.
So
And I
that's
did notice
interesting.
that everywhere that you can find, well, first of all, it's very limited the places that you're allowed to find his films, which is very intentional. And it is categorized as just dot 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 on all the sites, but then on the actual film, it's still dot 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 dot. Because I was curious
Yeah.
about that. Because again, are we going to go the Taylor Swift route and say Neil Breen intentionally did this Easter egg and the four dots mean something and, you know, it all adds up to the number 13 and like that means something to me? Or did he type one too many dots by accident and then leave it in the
Um,
film? You know what I mean? Which is easier for me to believe?
I
I don't
think it
know.
might be the second. That
It
is
feels
my
like the
argument.
second, but to be in charge of all of the things happening, including distribution, it I would hate to think that it's the case, but it very well may be.
But it's also wonderful that it is. Like, it's
It is.
wonderful that that made it.
It's art.
It's
Yeah,
like,
and you know, it's the mistakes that make it or whatever.
yeah, it's like when you discover a really strange editing mistake in a major feature film, or
Yeah.
a boom microphone, or a Starbucks cup in Game of Thrones. Like, it is one of those things.
Yeah.
Except Game
It
of
becomes a
Thrones
moment.
will digitally paint it out, whereas Neil Breen, he just leaves it for the world to see. In this article I read on ChicagoReader.com, it says or I'm sorry, Breen, and this is from a couple years ago. This is from 2018, around the time Twisted Pair came out, which I gotta say, I saw it in the theater. I'm just need everyone to know that. Breen made four films before Twisted Pair. I've seen all but one. His second, I Am Here, now, 2009. Yes, the title's ellipsis has four periods. If this is alarming, you may not want to watch Breen's movies. Or you might not want to watch Breen's movies. So, yeah, I think that's a great I don't know if we could call that a motif or a metaphor or something that directly represents his filmmaking is the title of that second film, which I love that film. It's wild.
Yeah, I will say, as far as prior to being invited on this podcast, I had seen, it had been a long time, but I had seen Fateful Findings. And so I revisited that for this. But I had seen the most clips from Twisted Pair. So I also have fully watched Twisted Pair. And I watched I Am Here now as well. I was like, what was the other one? But we were just talking about it. Um, Prior to like, again, kind of sitting down and prep for this, I was aware of him and I was aware of the idea of him, but it really does kind of, it boggles me how consistent he is in his public appearances and how consistent sort of the brand of Neil is across all of the movies, even with vastly different plots, even with vastly different stuff going on. It just, again, it's like that kind of, to a degree, indescribable feeling of I'm identifying this, and it's that auteur theory of like I'm in a Neil Breen film.
Yeah.
But I didn't really know anything about like personal life or anything. So looking into the interviews and seeing how the same it is, it's really kind of like I feel like he's always playing himself, which is always to a degree iconic as a filmmaker and actor, like kind of funny because I feel like we all do it in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But I had not been exposed to the amount of full plot start to finish movies until now. But now I have seen those three and kind of clips here and there from others. I
Mhm.
enjoyed a video essay about his style in Fateful Findings, and like someone did a film analysis of the dinner table scene. I was like, this is really a deep dive. And so I think that I was aware of him, but I didn't know how much of a cult following he really had until doing that investigation. And seeing the first thing that I put in my pod research is a full Q&A at a particular place, and the first like 2.5 minutes is the girl like freaking out because she's so excited that Neil Breen's there. She's holding the camera. She's like screaming. I mean, she's like, sorry for the beginning where I'm screaming in the description of the video. And so I think that I didn't know him the way that I know him now, in that I've been exposed to more of his fan base than ever before, not just his movies. I feel like the Neil Breen experience is more than the movies themselves, I think is what I kind of want to get across to
Yeah.
anyone finding them for the first time. Because I think if you just catch a movie on its own, you're going to miss that this is sort of like, I don't know, hopefully like a wider thing happening. It's at least a testament to like modern indie filmmaking and just the ability that he has. Like, I don't know. Neil Breen is a cultural moment. I think
Yes.
more so than just a guy. It's kind of a weird phenomenon that he maybe is not the best representative of, but I think he's a great example of it. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, definitely. This is a series of cultural artifacts that will live on individually and for the overall movement they created. I think this may be studied by historians. I know that sounds like a big statement, but this I think in the same way Ed Wood is now regarded as, you know, this wild filmmaker. I think we're going to look back at Breen and regard him as someone who really started something special, and I mean that unironically. Um,
Because when was his first film? Like, when did he? Because he's only done features. That's part of it that was really interesting for the research. He
Yeah.
completely did not go to film school and also did not do any short
He's
films.
like,
He
don't
went
need to
from
do a
zero to
short.
feature.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
He's
so
like, gotta
going
skip
from
that.
zero to feature is wild, but like in a real sense, impressive. Like, I'm being so serious. Like, I don't know. Neil Breen feels like when you go to an art museum and it's a modern art piece and it's like just something slashed on like a canvas really quick and everybody's like, I could have done that. And it's like, but you didn't. And
Yep.
unfortunately, like that's the whole thing is that whether or not you like it, he did do it. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, and he doesn't even care if you like it, is very much his vibe, which I
Yeah.
have a respect for in a lot
Yeah.
of
That is
ways.
so ballsy to be like, eh.
Right?
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
people ask like, do you read the stuff? He's like, I've never read a review of films. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you because you and I know making a film is so hard. Making any film is so hard. Making a video is difficult, right? Um, so the fact that this man, with seemingly as little help as he has had, has been able to put out 6 feature films, line up distribution, line up his own Shopify link or PayPal link. I don't even think he uses Shopify. A way to sell his DVDs, Blu-rays off his own website, create seemingly some sort of business from them to be able to complete to be able to continue funding future projects. It's very impressive what he has done, and kind of a dream, if I'll be honest. Like, I mean, I don't know that I would want the same kind of conversations around anything I would create, but
Notoriety in some ways, yeah.
yes, definitely. Yeah, his first film was in 2005. It was Double Down, which I have
Which
seen
he said is
once.
on film, right? Like it's on like 35 millimeter film, I think,
I
the
believe
early
so.
stuff.
I
It's
mean, I
like
don't think
going
digital.
from zero to shooting a feature film on film is crazy. And I feel
Yeah,
like that's part of the element and like I don't know. I think in prepping for this podcast, I'm like, how do I tell non-filmmaker people? But I mean, genuinely go try to like shoot something in your backyard that has continuity and that, makes sense. And by continuity, I mean like your hair isn't looking different when you cut back and forth and like there's sort of a steadiness and a flow to what's going on. It's like actually really hard to make movies. And I know that that's maybe like a tired conversation a lot of artists like ourselves have maybe been having over the Thanksgiving dinner table for quite some time. But it's like lots of hours of labor involved. And so the implication, which we'll get to in a second, because I think that may be part of this, is like that he's doing everything from writing it to being the star to at least having a lot of creative control over editing, not necessarily always editing, but
yeah.
like,
He
having
probably
that.
is sitting in there with a guy and going,
Yeah.
cut
And
there.
like
Yeah.
catering and casting and like all of the things, if true, are madly impressive. And I
Yeah.
think that that's like my biggest thing with him is whether or not you like the art that he produces, it is a skill to produce it in that speed and manner, because speed is an element too that I think is really critical when you're looking at his work. 6 feature films in less than 10 years. Is that what we're saying?
No,
Like, am
it's
I
we're
mathing
coming
a
up on
little over?
20. We're coming up on 20, but
Oh,
still.
oh yeah.
Um,
Oh, I see what you're saying. Like less than 2 decades, but like to do the type of random stuff that he's trying to accomplish with CG
yeah.
and everything being independently produced. Because actually, well, I feel like the main body of the work that I watched was in that like I guess 2009 to 2015 era. And those felt like they were cranking out quite a bit faster
Yeah.
back in the day. Like there was a really crunched period where he was doing, I feel like, let me look at his like time, let me get a Neil Breen timeline out here. Because I think that that would help me too. It's also crazy that he appears to like kind of still be active in doing things, right? At least with like fan communities and like having that thriving fan base still. Like it seems like people are really excited. He like put something out last year,
Yeah,
right?
Cade the Tortured Crossing, which I will say, people appear to be the most upset about Cade.
See, I am not caught up on the Cade lore personally, but I have to imagine that the themes probably I I think it's really interesting. I have to almost enter a universe that is different from the one that I inhabit when I
Mm-hmm.
watch movies like this.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Like,
Yep.
especially as a lady, and
Yes.
especially, like, in a lot of ways, you have to compartmentalize. And I'm sure just from reading a quick synopsis, uh, from the mental asylum stuff and the AI stuff, ooh, crazy combo for 2023. I don't think Neil probably nailed that in the vacuum in which he lives, which I visit to inhabit when I watch his films. Do you know what I
No,
mean? I can't.
there was no like really woke commentary on, mental illness or
Yeah.
uh, so I think you can basically go into it understanding that's not going to be there. However, he is kind to the people who are in this asylum. I will say that people, so this is a Cade the Tortured Crossing is a sequel to Twisted Pair. Um, the Q&A I read was that when he announced that Cade Altair, who basically who was the star of Twisted Pair, who became Cade Altair in the sequel because I think there was a spelling error. Um, not yeah, I looked into that. I was like, did I miss something? Nope, it changed. Um, It so people are upset about the fact that they believe there was a lack of quality in Cade the Tortured Crossing. They shot it entirely on green screen, which
Okay,
his
that'll do
previous
it.
films, like Twisted Pair, had kind of a mix, right? Like it
Hmm.
had you know, the Nevada State College or whatever where they were filming at 3 a.m. And all the green screen shots. But Cade the Torture Crossing was entirely on green screen. Used his signature B-roll stock footage, which is fine. He did feature a few different cities within a very short span of time. Um, but yeah, I enjoyed it. He fought a tiger.
I
Spoiler alert.
I did see that. I
Um,
also think it's really interesting that you say that people hate it the most because, and it may just be the people who are actually going in to review these films on IMDb, which is fair. It has a significantly higher rating than like the rest of the movies on
really.
IMDb, just because that's how I happen to check the years. And so I'm surprised by that. But maybe people saw the tiger and they were like, that's all that I needed to get
Yeah,
it.
this
Who
movie
knows?
has a tiger, therefore, I have everything I need in life.
Yeah. And
Um,
that's all. That's all that I came here for.
I mean, tigers are pretty cool.
He also, because I know that a lot of his whole thing is like everything's a metaphor and like, the tiger's a metaphor. And I don't know. I guess if you were to choose a niche object to always be a metaphor in the rest of your films, what would you like to select? Because his little rock thing, I think, is a very recurring bit. The
Yeah, the jewel or
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
yeah, lots of jewels, lots of tigers, very like royals by lord of him. I don't
Uh-huh.
know. It's just such a specific vibe.
Yeah.
Um, but
Well, what about you? What would you choose if you were to have a motif in your life that followed you around and meant something deep?
forever.
What would it be?
I feel like I would get tired of whatever rather quickly. I like the idea of, I don't know. Immediately, I was thinking like caterpillar, but I'm imagining just having to include like a long take of a caterpillar having to move across the screen could be a fun bit for the rest of my films. And I am predominantly a wedding filmmaker, so sorry to any future couples if I decide to do a fun Neil Breen bit
Yeah.
where I put on that theme though, maybe I'll steal. I saw this other video of a wedding videographer putting a Muppets clip in somebody's wedding video. It's like the Muppets reacting to someone when she's
Oh,
walking down the aisle. That's
that
so
is
funny to me.
really creative.
But
Yeah.
also, I would never do that. But for the purpose of this question, I totally would.
Well, and a caterpillar, you could also narrate it like David Attenborough or
Oh,
something and really turn that into some like
a
hardcore nature
moment.
documentary. Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, I would probably choose my 2010 Toyota Matrix because it just keeps running.
Yeah.
And
And that's inspirational for those of us that are trying to keep running as well.
in our society, no, and my stepson would say it's inhabited by the spirit of an old man because I've
Mhm.
begun, it's begun exhibiting this really weird sound that sounds like a ghost. It sounds kind of like this. Anyway, it's whenever I reverse. I think one of the fluids is low. I know someone's going to come on here and comment probably exactly what they
What's
think it
wrong with
is,
it?
but
Yeah. Actually, please do. It might be helpful if you know what
yes,
the
if you know.
sound sounds like. Yeah.
No, I think probably the last time I got my oil changed, they didn't check any of the other fluids, which is kind of annoying
Mm.
because that is one of the perks of
That's
an
why
oil
I went.
change. That is what you pay for, is for them to really make sure everything is all right. But
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah, 2010 Toyota Matrix. I'd love to get another car, but I'm waiting because
Till
it's
then.
it's taken me places still. Yes.
Yeah. Man.
So
Like and subscribe so that Sanna can eventually get another car.
yes, yes, please help me. Um, so yes, but yeah, the motifs, the metaphor, it is rich with metaphor and motifs, plural. And I think it's fun because some of them, don't really experience any callbacks. Like they show up and then it's there and it's gone and then forgotten about. Like in the beginning of Fateful Findings when they're in the storage facility and they come across the book. Am I dreaming that or imagining that, or did that really happen? Because I
That's a
haven't seen that
good
movie in a hot minute.
that's a good point. And I think it's one of those things where he very publicly has been like, I love when people can take multiple meanings from my films. And so I think that it's it's tough for me because although I don't think that Neil Breen from his vibes is communicating with any sort of fan material, I mean no disrespect towards him, and that's why I'm being very careful, I guess. But it's tough for me to talk about his work and examine his work because I feel like his intention is to be like the MCU of cult cinema, not like to like a for capitalism reasons, just like he is like this is my art and I'm gonna
Yeah.
make stuff that's authentic to me. But at the same time, he's like not necessarily equipped with the skills or the follow through in a lot of areas to like commit to that bit fully, but
Mm-hmm.
also without I guess, the startup funds or whatever the situation is, or more so the desire to not hire other people. I think that's kind of like contradictory. I get that we want to be a one man show, but I think he has genuinely interesting and kind of unusual tastes and kind of a stylistic approach. I feel that it could be done in a way that was more palatable to a lot of people, but I
Hmm.
feel like until he gives up that sort of like death arm grip of the creative control, it's not a possibility, but that is almost the allure of it in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. Do you know
It-
what I mean? It's
yeah.
because you know this is fully his baby that it's almost like we're watching in a lot of ways to see him fail, but then kind of being impressed with him at the end of it every
Yeah.
time. And that's kind of what he was saying about being in screenings with fans is like at the beginning they'll be laughing at stuff that he didn't necessarily mean to be funny, but then by the end of the movie they're like kind of with it. They're like in the universe. And so they're kind of just like following what's happening. Like they it's only a comedy until you like put yourself in the Breen verse. Do you know
Hmm.
what I mean?
Hmm. It's like when you go to a Shakespearean play and you have to kind of put your Elizabethan hat on to
Yeah.
like watch it. And I mean, I find Shakespeare very enjoyable, but there is kind of this thing of understanding, oh, they're going to do asides to the audience because that's the style,
How this
or
works.
there's going
Yeah.
to be a wedding because it's Shakespeare, you know. In a Neil Breen film, there's going to be an effort to take down the government and people in power. There are going to be
And just
someone
hot
holding a
ladies
jewel.
and they're
Yes.
just fighting over Neil Breen. They're all the hot ladies in the tri-state area, they just need a piece of that. And it's
Yeah.
so the romance is an element of the Breen verse. And I don't like I would like to talk about that as well. I think it's a
Okay.
very interesting
I would
subplot
like
of
your
his
thoughts on
life.
that. Because I have a thought about his most recent film. I think I have a little
Okay.
bit of a hot take, but I've said this hot take before. But I want to hear what your thoughts are about him and his romantic partners, sometimes multiple, in one
Yeah.
movie.
It happens a lot. And I guess and
Yeah.
that's kind of that's what it initially awakens in me is again, have you dated this guy of like I'm a visionary director and I'm also the lead and also you're my girlfriend and also you have to have a topless scene.
Hmm.
Like this is such a like classic be in my indie film where you're the star, you're in the shower for the entire movie.
Yeah.
It's kind of like my initial thought is that, but the thing about Neil Breen romance for me is that it's like so, again, if you can insert clips, so weirdly respectful looking. Like not, it doesn't feel like, at least from watching the end result of the scene. Now, I would love to hear specifically like women that have been the other actors in the scenario, like what the vibe on set was like. Because if the vibe on set was more like that, creepy guy in film school energy, that totally changes things for me. But it's almost weird how just like they'll just kind of like look at each other, have a Disney Channel kiss, and then be like on with their merry way. So I almost feel like it's there in a Neil Breen film for functionality. And it's almost like he does the Adam Sandler thing of just like, I'm going to find the hottest lady who will show up to this casting call to be my wife. And I
Yeah.
don't think it's necessarily, I don't know him at all. I don't have any basis for the. I want to hear their takes, I think, to have a better take. But
Yeah.
initially, it's like I see it as both skeevy and just kind of like, okay, style. Okay, like this is something that is kind of very important, again, metaphor wise, for you to include. And you've kind of done that in sort of a very like sterile. It feels like a weird way to say it, but kind of
Yeah.
like a sterile way. Like I am here dot 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 now has sort of the most like weird implied sex scene, I think, where they're just kind of staring at each other. Right? And he's like sometimes a monster, sometimes a guy,
Yeah.
and they're just staring at each other.
The
But
space
it's like
Jesus.
not yeah, but it's like not in the way that I think a lot of other kind of gross dudes would make it weirder. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, I
Yeah.
hate that the bar is in hell, but I'm only okay with it because I've seen people do way worse. I guess it's kind
Yeah.
of what I'm thinking.
Oh yeah, I've watched a lot of, because I'm constantly on Tubi scouring for
Oh, for the,
whatever
yeah.
I can. And I've come across a couple like I'm like, "Oh, this film actually has a distributor." Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
And there's some pretty awful scenes in some of these lower budget indies. But yeah, I would agree with you. They're not nearly the level that they could be. Um, I will say that so I saw Twisted Pair in the theater, as I previously stated, I just need everyone to know that. Yeah, the Plaza.
Dude.
I went and I saw it. Anyway, but I do remember, so you've seen Twisted Pair. Their weird little role play that they do. When he is asking her out on a date, she is refusing. And then he shows up in her house, and it turns out it is all a weird role play between a married question mark couple.
Yeah, I'm
That
sure.
I remember that received some shock in the theater, and then laughter after it was revealed.
I
So
guess I forgot the initial feeling because it was resolved in the plot. But
yeah,
yeah, when the first time that I was thinking that, I was like, yeah, if someone had only watched Fateful Findings and they just heard my like hot take, they'd be like, he was a stalker.
yeah,
Um, but like, I don't know. I think it's just that we, in a lot of ways, have like normalized creep behavior.
yeah,
Like Edward Cullen is in a lot of ways a stalker too. Like
yeah.
even the weirder Neil Breen stuff doesn't land as weird as a lot of mainstream things that I'm supposed to be okay with.
Yes.
So that's kind of it's weird that like we're in a space where he's doing it better than a lot of people, I think, just in terms of like including and vaguely respecting women. Writing dialogue is a whole different story. But like the fact that they're there is sadly better than most, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Neil Breen films feel like you're watching one act plays in a lot of ways. Do you know what I'm saying? Like it's structured to where like almost everybody is like a love interest of someone else and there's sometimes intermingling and there's sometimes drama, but it's very much like we have this limited cast of characters, we have this limited location set, we are doing this thing and you just
Hmm.
have to be in the black box experience. There
Yeah.
is a very like you have to absorb that. And I think just because of that setup and the nature of the setup and the romance subplot, I don't know if he's written a female character that doesn't. Wait.
I am here now,
Because
maybe.
I'm here now with the job, the ladies at the office. There was a lot of like, we are firing you because the government won't let us pay you money anymore. It's literally like this is how the dialogue sounds. Again, like I even deep diving into this feels so silly, but I think it's worth studying too. I think if I was teaching a film class, it'd be like technically all the story elements are here, right? What
Uh-huh.
feels weird about this? I think is a great assignment for early filmmakers of like
Yeah.
pinpoint why. Yes, it's kind of funny, it's kind of awkward. What is he doing that makes you feel like it's goofy? Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like
Yeah.
really unpack it, actually. Because I think that that would be more, I think it's interesting to look at the style and be like, how much of this do you think is for a reason and how much of this do you think is in some ways also maybe like a generational situation of like technology understanding. He does seem just a bit closed off to new things
Yeah.
in terms of like, he like has his processes and his ways. And I wonder if any of the things that we perceive as mistakes or whatever are sort of like just how he understands film in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I know that. So first of all, I it's the fact that I'm like, did one of his films pass the Bechdel test? Oh, maybe he
Yeah.
could be a little feminist icon. No, Um,
And even so, it would be again, it's like if it does, the
low bar.
dialogue is so crazy. Yeah.
Yes.
It's like the scenes themselves, if they pass, are barely scenes if it
Yes.
is a professional test. But that's so funny.
Again, he lives in an alternate universe. We have to put on our Neil
Yes.
Breen glasses for
Yeah.
to be able to view it. But yeah, it's funny because so I was reading a transcript from a Q&A he did for Cade the Tortured Crossing, and someone was like, who are your inspirations for filmmaking? And he did previously talk about the fact that, he remembers as a child, like his parents taking him to the movies and like how much of an event that was. And he would just look up at it and it was just like a dream, and but he became an architect and took the more rational, logical path in his life, but decided to pursue the stream. But when asked his inspiration, he was like, well, I mean, there are things I like about different films, but I don't know that I have a favorite. I'm paraphrasing, of course, which is kind of interesting to me that, because I personally like I can cite, a handful of filmmakers that I'm like, wow, they're really incredible and I want to be like them. But he's like, no one in particular. I like certain things, but I don't have a favorite. That's very interesting to me. I don't know. What do you think about that?
It feels to me this is gonna be such a like maybe chaotic take because again, I think the optimist in me wants to believe that the Neil Breen verse is calculated. And so for me, it feels like this almost libertarian idea of like not wanting to be affiliated with anybody just in case. Like in some ways, I think he's like, like I don't want to give away my secrets, maybe in like a
Hmm.
classic magician way. I don't want, you know, filmmakers to feel like I don't want any smoke from this
Hmm.
if he is at all aware of his like kind of public persona. Because if he was like, you know, I don't know, if he was like Quentin Tarantino is my number one inspiration, Quentin Tarantino would probably be like, what the hell, Neil Breen? Why are you mentioning me at all? Do you know what I mean? I don't know if there's any element of like saving face or being mysterious as far as like
Yeah.
public persona.
Yeah.
But because again, I hate this second version alternative that he literally is not actually a super movie fan. He just likes doing this, which is so possible as
Yeah.
well. And so the optimist in me likes to believe that he has favorite movies. He just wants to be a man of mystery. But the realist in me is like, oh no, he's like not familiar enough with cinema to answer this question. So it could go anyway. There are two
Yeah.
wolves inside me when it comes to Neil Breen. It's a matter of which I will feed and nourish or whatever.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I think both are possible. Both are possible. So I forgot to mention my hot take. Um, Cade the Tortured Crossing in regards to romantic scenes. Him and the woman, I forget her name in the movie. She was the doctor. They had legitimate chemistry.
That's sweet. And he's
Yeah.
had multiple, like, I hate that I'm having to, like, point this out, but I'm being so serious with, like, the rise of the trad wife movement and everything. He's had, like, multiple lady doctors,
Yeah.
women in STEM. Like, in a lot of ways, he is not creating, again, I'm not making an argument for, like, Neil Breen feminist film at all, but it sucks that he's doing potentially better than a lot of stories in some ways. And I'm
Yeah.
like, the fact that we're still even talking about stuff like this is really annoying to me.
I mean,
But, here we are. I can't believe, first of all, just looking at the timeline turnaround, I mean, it really does look like they've been max like 5 years apart, which is so crazy. Like to
yeah.
think about feature films cranking out for a decade, it's like less than 5 year turnaround is really nuts.
Yeah.
Um, but I maybe I have to maybe I have to see Cade the Georgian Crossing. Sorry, I immediately saw a screen grab from the film, and it looked crazy automatically. So that is very exciting for later.
Yeah, it definitely, Cade definitely feels to me like there were some things that he decided to put in the film, like they were on set, and that day he was like, you know, it'd be cool if, yeah. So there are some moments that I question if they were pre-planned. But it did seem like, again, we don't know what anyone's experience was truly like, but it seemed like everyone appeared to be having fun.
So I did hear one interview from an actress. She was in Pass Through, which let's see where that falls into things. Pass Through is in 2016, which is in kind of the dead middle. She was saying that now this sounds complicated because they were filming in the desert, and a lot of her problems were pertaining to that. Again, I don't think this man knows as far about like running sets and everything. And if he is truly doing everything, that's a lot of things to do if we're talking about catering and everything too. She was saying that this is Kathy Corpus of
Mhm.
Neil Breen's Pass Through. I heard a phone interview with her, and she was talking about how it was like miserably hot. He was fighting with them all the time, and her character in Pass Through has to be super. She's yelling basically the whole time,
Oh yeah.
and he basically got her so mad in real life. And you can really see in the movie, she's like, I am actually pissed at Neil Breen out of character. Like, we were fighting. But she was like, I think it was one of those situations where it's like a Kubrick or something where, he's pushing her to this point to get this emotional response, which is so like if you idolize the Hollywood guys, but you want to do it yourself, like doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
Um,
Like
but
Shelley Duvall in The Shining
exactly, I
did
immediately thought of The
158
Shining.
takes. Yeah.
Yeah. Like at what point? I don't know, but so that seemed more like a circumstantial like and even she was like I see what he was doing, like he's always two steps ahead of you, like even talking about her experience, she was still like very complimentary of him, which leads me to believe that it wasn't like he just feels like a diva to me in the most pure way, like in the most film bro diva way. That I think
Yeah.
we've all met this dude that thinks he's a visionary, and so you're on set and he might be way too aggressive or whatever, but it's like all for the art. And you're just like, either you're with that guy or you're not with that guy. And that's very much, I think, the nature of his work in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. If he did pull a Kubrick, that is I
Like in
I
the
mean,
Nevada desert, like having them do all kinds of like long days and stuff. But I don't know.
I worked on a commercial one time, and we had to stand in 95-degree weather for like an hour. And you know what? We got, because it was a union project, we got a bump for having to
Yeah.
withstand those awful conditions. But these actors are working on a non-union film in
They found on
BFE.
Craigslist.
Yeah,
So
so
it's limited in terms of what they can do. And I think that is something if we want to get into maybe this side of things, that is something that kind of concerns me about Neil Breen-esque figures. Just because I think the more work that you do and the more fame that you do gain and the more perhaps funding and the bigger that the dreams get, if you're already sort of having these diva moments and if you're already maybe only including women to be romantic sub counterparts, I could see it becoming a more nefarious situation just as people find power. But like, it's also so crazy to like, I think say that when I don't know if you've worked on a film set, there can be a very toxic like family esque mentality, like one of those like
Yeah.
here at this workplace we're all family,
Yeah.
but like worse and sort of like
Yeah.
theater department incestuous at times where everyone's dating everyone and stuff. Like it
Yeah.
can become interpersonally really interesting and bad. And so the most concerning element for Neil Breen stuff for me is more so like you said how these films get made because one of his things is definitely being not like anti-union but very like I'm not fooling with that. It's
Yeah.
kind of his energy.
Hmm.
And so I am slightly concerned about like the people other than Neil Breen that are working on these projects because are they getting credit? Are there uncredited people or is there anybody that is maybe being treated not as appropriately
Yeah.
because of the nature of the way that the films are created, you know?
Yeah. Who knows? Who knows? I mean, I
Yeah,
think
someone report back. If you've been in a Neil Breen film,
I want to talk to you.
DM, yeah, comment so that Sanna can find you because we want to talk to you.
Yes, please. Please let me know. Share your story.
Yeah, share your hashtag my Neil Breen tea and we'll find you.
Yeah. And I hope I really hope that it's only mildly uncomfortable and not
Yeah,
anything
because
horrible.
it seems like a weird, it seems like a weird vibe on set for sure. But I also kind of admire his commitment to the unknowns in a
Hmm.
lot of ways. In a from like a filmmaker perspective, that does scare me because they don't know, like he doesn't really know what is industry standard and what is not. So I think in a lot of ways you can the acting perhaps maybe just a bit of a tiny clue at times as to people's previous experience levels maybe. But I don't know. I think it's more it's the power dynamic aspect. If you hold all the keys, I just hope that you're, doing what you should be doing with them, which is helping
Yeah.
everyone else out.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I have thought about that too. I have thought about that too. Um, worried about his sets and what they're really like. But yeah, yeah, I agree with you. I hope his sets are okay and not a
We hope you
terrible
had a great
experience.
time on a Neil Breen set. That's what we hope.
Yes. Yes. I do think it's funny because so you watched some interviews with him. I read that one very long transcript from a Q&A and read another. I think we both found the same interview on Influx magazine.
Yeah.
I think what's so interesting about him is that when you read or listen to interviews with him, it feels just like a filmmaker. Like I mean, he is a filmmaker, but it feels like a
Yeah.
conventional filmmaker. Like and he actually gives some great advice, like how he got started. He just started doing it and he learned by failing, and that's great advice. I had a film professor, oh God, 15 years ago, who was like, you need to just start making films and get all your bad films out of you, which, Neil Breen just skipped that part. But
I would say he's maybe I would say he's maybe actually taking that advice pretty to heart, actually.
yes,
He's maybe getting them all out right in front of our eyes at
yeah,
times.
but instead of like burying them, he's like,
Yeah. He's like
monetizing
showing
them.
it to the world. Yeah.
Yeah, which I kind of love that because, you know, I I love to create, but I in anything I do, there's always this worry, and I think that's pretty ubiquitous among artists. Like, is this good? Are people gonna like it? Are people gonna hate it? And that man is like, whatever, you know,
And it
I like
is
it.
like I've been talking to a lot of actor friends about this, particularly my lady actors. I feel that, and again, like it's sort of a tired conversation, but like to approach the world with the confidence of just like an average white man in a lot of ways is unfortunately like the Neil Breen story for me because I feel like it is super sick and impressive, but how much of it is just like we've kind of told dudes of his kind of general age and vibe that they can do whatever they want, right?
Hmm.
That if you've kind of achieved just being I mean even he had like an impressive career, like making money in the way that he did prior to this is impressive. He seemed to have started all of this later in life. That's really all impressive. I just feel like there are, perhaps ladies out there, folks maybe that haven't had the same amount of encouragement as just random white dudes who think that they can do everything.
Yeah.
And so I almost wish that more people had the Neil Breen mentality of just kind of going for it because I really would like to see what would happen if everybody had just like the bold and bodacious confidence of this guy to be like, I'm gonna start making films and I will. I feel
Yeah.
like there are it is sort of a not to be like Neil Breen is a superhero story for filmmakers, but in some ways it is like, oh, if I want to do this, I can pursue this and
Yeah.
I can just show up and kind of act like I'm good enough and that is in a lot of cases good enough, because if he truly is doing everything, distribution and all, it is crazy to have had the success that he's had. And I think that it really shows that now it is way less out of reach for a lot of people that may be thinking, oh, I have this idea for this series, I have this podcast idea, I have this short, I have this thing, but, who's going to watch it? Or like, what if it's not good? Or how am I going to make it? And it's like, if we just have the blind faith that this one random man has in himself, like, it's not blind. He's made movies. Again, no shade to Neil, unless something crazy comes out about Neil and then full shade to Neil.
Yeah.
Um, but, like, until then, he's just a guy doing the thing that everybody talks about doing. And so, in a lot of ways, I admire him. But I also think that if it's that easy, respectfully, then more people should do it too. And
Yeah.
so, I like that advice, and it's something that I've definitely carried with me too. Because even looking back on early days stuff, it's like there's something in everything that's usable or like good to me that I've created. Maybe every full piece that I've done is not the bestest, but I see what I've learned through everything.
Hmm.
But I mean, I think even me sometimes, if I have a feature idea, there is that like uh imposter syndrome, I guess, that I feel like we all, like Neil Breen, have the ability to push past and just kind of go for it. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I just want a tenth of his confidence. And
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like he
yeah.
just showed up and literally started, not really knowing
Yeah.
anything, just trying it out.
He's like, I want to do this thing and I will.
Yeah.
And
And
yeah.
like we've all had an idea. I think maybe this is a secret, like, do that thing you've been putting off, or write that scene that you keep not wanting to actually write down and letting live in your brain, you know?
Yeah.
Um, it sort of was the research for this in a lot of ways was like a call out of like, oh yeah, you too can self-publish stuff, and make things with the skills that you have actually.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, on that note, I think that's like a really inspirational way to end this conversation. But before we do, is there anything else you want to say about this crazy uh, Neil Breen journey that we've been on? Anything that you've learned or anything that you want to highlight?
I feel like if I take everything that Neil Breen says at face value, again, I'm dissociating in parts of this because I think there is a reality in which this is a whole bit and he's like, it's all very, he's a genius or whatever. But there's
It's
also a bit
it's
where,
it's very, very elaborate performance art that
yes,
has pulled the wool over our eyes, and really he's going to come out one day and just go, "Hey, fooled ya."
but I mean, Paris Hilton, like we've had like these sort of characters among us, that have, if you're good and you're in this business, because in a lot of ways he's in this business, right? It's like how much of it is artful, I don't know. Um, but Neil Breen, I think when you talk to him in interviews about his intent, I feel it's very similar to my intent. I feel if he's telling the truth, there is sort of like a childlike whimsy that he has about his work and his approach to his work, in that it doesn't even necessarily matter what it means. I just want film to make you feel something. And
Hmm.
that's really powerful. And in a lot
Yeah.
of ways, his films are enjoyable to watch. Whether or not they're highbrow cinema, like literally you could like do a I laughed, I cried moment with most of them. Like there's gore, there's romance, there's supernatural stuff, there's conspiracy theories. Like there's it's literally like it's like off-brand Lifetime happening, but also sci-fi and fantasy at the same time. And so I feel like there is sort of this just like curiosity about his work and this general like conversation that he's trying to have with the audience, or more so he's not trying to talk about anything as much as he's trying to like give people the time that he had as a kid watching movies. I think is his
Yeah.
genuine, like if his intent is to bring that to someone, and I think that's really sweet and in a lot of ways iconic. I think he's a total nut job in a lot of ways, but I think that just that intent of like bringing that magic and being very, his whole thing of like making big bold choices and being, I wouldn't say campy, but being very like off the beaten path, like marching to the beat of his own drum or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that he is a very interesting person, and I agree. I
Hmm.
think that regardless of how you feel about him, the moment in which he started creating and his body of work, I think is worth being studied just because of how reflexive it is of the time that we're living in now. I think that
Yeah.
the technology that we have, our access to free filmmaking materials online or just from watching movies and having that ease of access, I think that for me, he's a he's a complicated person, but I think that his work really shows that like if you're a movie lover and you want to kind of capture that feeling that you
Hmm.
have as a viewer and be more active in it and be a creator of something, I think that if Neil Breen can do it, you can do it too.
Yeah.
And I think that that's not a bad thing. I think that, he's just a guy with some dreams and he's trying his
Yeah.
best, and aren't we all?
And let's and I think it also gives us the encouragement to not take ourselves so seriously, and
Yeah.
not have to feel this pressure to put out the highest of high art all the time, because um lowbrow art, a lot of lowbrow art is now considered highbrow art, and vice versa, so you never know, and really you just got to enjoy your life. Oh.
And I
So
feel like I guess really quickly to the cult element of it, I will say that I think that he also, regardless of how you feel about his apparently controversial last film, which I still need to check out, I feel like he really has developed in a lot of ways this community that maybe he
Mhm.
was seeking of the Breen verse. And I feel like a lot of people, are admiring his work. So it almost is another testament to say he doesn't even care what anybody thinks. And that authenticity has gotten him a lot of organic following and actual community of people who are like-minded with him. So even if your thing is not for everybody, I mean, cult cinema is all about finding your people. And so, maybe you're a Breen head now. Maybe we've put you on to something. But even if you are not and you're like, oh, well, no, I'm scared of being received in a certain way, it's like there are probably little freakazoids out there that like the same stuff that you like. And, I know that I'm in some sort of like niche cult cinema subgenres too. So I guess all this to say, find your cults of weird people if you're trying to be someone, kind of in this space, or if you're admiring works like this and you want to kind of get into that more experimental stage as a creator, like, do it. Like, take Neil's advice. Go make edgy choices and do, like, go kind of break the mold if you feel like what you're currently doing with your art isn't doing it for you,
Absolutely. But please try and avoid starting an actual cult, because we've got enough of those.
A real cult.
Yeah.
We're actually full this year specifically.
Yeah.
No more cults allowed.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Well, cool. Thank you, Molly. Do you have anything that you would like to promote or share with the audience?
Yeah, I guess just keeping up with me. The majority of my work is very documentary style, which is so funny that I'm so invested in film theory because of how opposite the nature of the majority of my stuff is. But you can keep up with my company on our website, moontrip.space. Didn't even know you could get .space, so I feel like that's a flex.
Yeah.
And we are also on Instagram at moontrip.mp4. So come on and stop by.
Thank you so much, Molly, for being a great guest and offering some fresh perspective on this guy we love that we call Neil Breen. All links to where you can follow Molly will be in the show notes / description. And I encourage you to please follow this podcast / subscribe if you're on YouTube, and we'll see you next time.